Thank you all. I'm Brett Morgan. I'm Developer Relations Engineer in Google Sydney. I work on Flutter, as you can probably guess. And what are we talking about today? We're talking about putting Flutter on all the things. Okay. So I'm guessing, well actually here's the first bit of audience participation. Who here is actually using Flutter? So you've downloaded it, you've got something running. Okay, who's got so far as to push something to like Play Store or App Store or those sorts of things? Okay, so we've got a couple of people in prod. You guys are brave, I like it, good. No, actually we've got quite a few people, including many Google teams who are pushing to prod using Flutter, so it's not as scary as some people make it out to be. So here's the sort of top points about why we think Flutter is a great idea. It's all about fast development, so it's about really great developer experience. We use composable widgets, so you turn around and you want to take a chunk of functionality and use it all over the place. You can turn around and turn that into a named reusable component, which we call a widget. It's customizable. It's all about 60 frames per second, or 90 or 120 for those people with really high-end phones. And we've got good IDE support, used by lots of developers, so on and so forth. And this is our guiding mantra. Those of you who've seen this slide before will probably notice there's a slight change from, say, about a year ago, where we used to talk about being for mobile development. We're now saying mobile, web, and desktop. So today what I'm going to talk about is, well, how to do Flutter development on mobile, web, and desktop. So the first thing I need to talk about is channels. So I'm guessing most of you are unstable. It's a good place to be. Nothing wrong with being unstable. You get a good polished release once a quarter, and I'm guessing some of you probably can guess when the next release will be. Beta is a good place to get sort of a foreshadowing of what's coming. We basically aim to push a new release to the beta channel about once a month. It's a good place to see what's coming. It's a good place to test your code against to understand what's going to break at the next stable release. Dev is approximately weekly. You probably don't want to go here unless you're really hankering for trying out new features. We don't give great guarantees about stability here. It's a good place if you want to see what's coming. And of course, master, you probably don't want to be on master. The absolute last thing you want to do is do a live presentation in front of a bunch of people on master. So what am I doing today? I'm giving a live presentation in front of all of you guys on master. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, so how do you enable Flutter for web, for your applications? Well, here's the instructions that I've stolen shamelessly from flutter.dev/web. You change to dev, you do an upgrade to get all the latest bits, you enable web in your config, and you create a project. This will create an extra directory. So if you've done Flutter development so far, you'll have seen there's an iOS directory and Android directory. Flutter Web will create a web directory, and it will contain precisely one file, index.html. Not too hard. Then you can go into your project and then run a target of Chrome, and that will run a Chrome browser that we then turn around and hot reload into. And of course there's the fun part. If you're really, really dangerous, you can go to master, do an upgrade, enable macOS desktop, and then create your project with macOS. What this does is it turns on a bunch of additional functionality. It creates a new directory called macOS, and it gives you the ability to write applications for the desktop. So that's what we're going to do today. Time to go to my editor. Okay, here's your traditional hello world. And once I find my mouse cursor, you can see that alongside your traditional iOS directory, and there's an Android directory, I also have, as I mentioned before, a web directory that contains a super complicated index.html file. And the more interesting one is the macOS directory. It's got a whole bunch of stuff that Xcode needs to build a macOS binary. So what am I going to build today? I'm going to build a little application that shows an inspirational quote with a photo behind it, and it animates sweetly between them. And I'm going to run it on 4 platforms. May the gods be nice to me. Okay, let's take this forward. We've got traditional hello world. I'll just hide my file chooser. Hopefully you've seen all this and you've seen it all before. If not, I should have brought my Flutter 101 talk, not this one, but that's okay. We have a stateless widget. This is not going to change very much. Well, it's actually going to change in a second. But what is going to change is I'm going to put a whole bunch of stuff into this stateful widget down here. Most interesting thing is, or one of the great features we released in the last stable build, is dark mode. And how is that done? Change the brightness. You get a sweet little animation to going to dark. Cool. So, as you can tell, I'm going to put light text on top of dark images, hopefully. Some of them won't be dark, and we'll see how to fix that. So the first thing I need to do is make API calls. One of the feedbacks we usually get is, you show me this app, it does lots of stuff, now how do I talk to the network? The first thing you need to do to be able to talk to the network is talk JSON, because all APIs these days talk JSON. So what I've done is I'm making a call out to an API, which I'll show you in a second. That API returns me a JSON object with 3 attributes, and I've got some breakages. Well, one of the great things about JSON is you need to map it from a string into an object, and what we do is we run a little build tool, which I've set up to run. If we go over here, I've got a little, what's effectively a platform independent makefile, and it's running pub run, build runner build, yada yada yada. As you can see, this turns around and creates a mapping from JSON back into my object, and also out again. Cool. So now that I have the ability to understand JSON, oops, I went one step too far. Oh, actually no, I'm actually creating a standalone quote. Ta-da-da-da-da. Love when my editor types for me. I wish I could get this at work. So now we have a quote on the screen. That's good, but it'd be better if we actually got something from the network. So the first step for doing that is we need a HTTP client. The neat thing about this HTTP client that I have here over, if you look on the web and go, I want to do network access from Flutter, they'll often show you stuff that uses Dart.io directly. I'm going to suggest you don't do that and use HTTP instead. The HTTP client has 2 advantages. 1, it gives you a higher level API, and 2, it automatically figures out whether you're on the web or on Flutter native and uses the appropriate connectivity. Because of course if you're in a web browser, you don't have direct access to the ability to make network requests. You need to use the browser to actually do your network requests, and HTTP does that for you. So now I'm making an API client. Here's the magic part. Turn around, make a request, and generate a quote from it, and then we put it on the screen. And all I have to do is actually wire that in. So what do we do? Every 15 seconds, sounds like a good time to get a new thing on the screen. Now what I'm doing is giving my state object an initializer, so when it comes up it will turn around and do something, and in this case I'll turn around and create a new quote. Most importantly, for those of you new to Flutter, is this magic little incantation here. Inside of a state object, when you change your state, you need to effectively tell Flutter, please re-render me. So that's what that does. It will get more content as we go on. So I'll just kick it up. What I'm doing there is I'm forcing it to reload. That's to restart the state object so that it actually has this ability to load quotes. And as you can see, we now have quotes on the screen. And it should hopefully change in 15 seconds, but I'm not going to wait that long. Now looking at this, it's great, we've got a quote on the screen, but what would be nicer is that if it wasn't hard running against these edges. It looks just kind of badly designed. So what I'm going to do is do the usual thing, add some padding, hit save, and boom, you have a nice looking quote. Okay, that's cool. I wonder what's next. Yes. So I've got to this stage. As I showed you before, I've got a bunch of new directories, and I have just one thing on the screen. Let's fix that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my laptop squeal. I'm going to start up Android emulator as well. Sorry, it's getting ahead of itself. And then I'm going to go over here to the debugger and I'm going to go, no, don't do that. Don't save. I'm going to click this button and run all the things. Okay, fine. I'll stop all the things and then start all the things. So as you can see, we now have the capability, as of a couple of versions ago, of the VS Code plugin. I'm sure the Android Studio plugin does the same thing, where you can run multiple configurations at the same time. This is important now that you want to have the ability to run, say, Android, iOS, the web, and of course desktop all at the same time to tune your layout decisions and figure out what's going on. Okay, where did all my things go? Android, actually no, that's not up yet. So in about a minute or two, we'll actually start seeing things appear on the screen. Takes a little while. I'm running 4 separate compilations on my poor little laptop here, which is why it's starting to get nice and warm. So now's a wonderful time if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do interpretive dance. Up the back.
Does the web stuff have to be in Chrome, the browser, or can it be in any Chromium-based browser?
Okay, so the primary difficulty we have with supporting multiple browsers is in development time, in that we need the ability to hot reload, which means we need to take control of the browser to turn around and go, "Oi, you reload." Once it actually comes to production time, when you actually build a fully tree-shaken JavaScript that runs across platforms. So it's just, we've effectively got the same thing on Flutter Web that we do on desktop, in that we have a development experience and a runtime experience, and the two run different compilers and need different tooling. So as you can probably see, I've been testing in Firefox and Safari and all the things. No, wrong one. There we go. So what do I got? I've got 1, 2. That one's not happy. Android, what happened? I said I had 4. I've only got 3. Let's go and actually bring up the debug logs. Wrong button. This is what happens when you type with the wrong hand. Okay, so if I have a look in, just hide all that, debug console, and I go look at macOS, you'll see something interesting. You'll see a nice little error log. And this is something that if I'd done Flutter create -- macOS space project name, wouldn't have happened. But I thought it important to show you if you're turning around and transitioning one of your applications across to macOS. And what it's getting up with, oh, that's actually a different one than I was expecting. Oh, damn it. I'm just going to close all the things temporarily and start again. I'm going to show you the fix to one of the bugs, and hopefully that fixes the other one. Live demoing. So one of the bugs you're going to hit when you do a conversion temporarily is the fact that it's going to come up and say that macOS is not a known platform. So what's happening here is the bottom layer, the Dart UI layer, the sort of hardware abstraction layer, knows that we're running on macOS and is exposing that to the Flutter library. The Flutter library at this point basically goes, I know about Android, I know about iOS, I don't know about this macOS thing. Could you please help me out here? So what I'm doing right now is that I'm turning around and forcing in a value that it understands. This will go away. We're in the process of setting up to have an actual macOS target, so that Flutter actually turns around and configures a bunch of its settings, where things go on the screen, so that it looks appropriate for macOS. It's going away soon, so this will no longer be required. I was actually hoping that I wouldn't need this code for this weekend, but I do. Okay, so hopefully, if I go back here, it will actually work this time. We shall see. Live demoing, what fun. Okay, so we've got that fix in place. There is actually another fix that I should talk about while I'm here. If you have a look in macOS, runner entitlements, specifically this one. So, thank you macOS, nice of you to show up. There's an interesting thing about doing cross-platform development is you get to learn all the various intricacies of developing on all the platforms. So with macOS, the binary we were creating is actually running inside of the sandbox. So there's this wonderful sandbox. I think it's becoming mandatory soonish in macOS land. You actually have to turn around and ask for all the permissions you want. And in this case, if you want to make network access, you need this permission. I want to be a network client. Because of the way we're doing development, we also need a bunch of other ones. We need the ability to run a server because the application is running observatory so that we can inspect it, and we're doing just-in-time compilation. Whereas if you look at our release entitlements, as you can see, we're saying we're in the sandbox, but in this case, because I'm making API requests, I also need the network capability. So that's just one of those things about writing for multiple platforms, as you will learn. Each platform has its own needs. So let's push on. We've got this quote on the screen, have network access, but I said I was going to put a photo behind it. Well, that'd be nice. Let's turn around and create a photo. And, well, it's not just one photo, it's a list of photos. So I'll just bring up grind again once more to actually build my mapping code. And give it about 20 seconds, I'd say. Everything should go green, hopefully. I'll just size this one down. So this is something that will be actually interesting for those of you who have done Flutter development, is that traditionally you had a couple of size classes you had to worry about, like different size phones and maybe a tablet or two. When you start doing, oh dear, desktop development, yes, I should fix that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is create a client. This is actually talking to a server I control that uses Unsplash API. I was going to show that as well, but I figured out my talk would probably be about 2 hours long, so that will be an upcoming Medium post probably. And I'm creating a photo client. There's an interesting thing I want to point out here that's a problem. Well, it's not really a problem, but it's a less optimized structure. If you're generating a web application that you want to serve through a server that knows how to do API requests, you actually want to have different connection strings between your web browser-based version of your app and your mobile ones. So we'll fix that in an upcoming edition. Okay, what just happened? Oh yes. I'm going to randomly pick numbers. So where do you get random numbers? The math library, of course. And we're going to have a background photo. We're going to have a list of photos that we'll now instantiate, and a random number. So I can pick one. So the important thing here is that on initialization, we're going to load up a bunch of stuff. And I'm using asynchronous coding, so the first photo we show will be the red one, because network requests take time, but after that we'll have a bunch of different ones. We'll again restart things, and hopefully, yep, that one got it. It looks like I've lost iOS. I have indeed. So the wonderful thing about running multiple is that you get to learn when things fall off the wagon. Hopefully that brings it back. Okay, so now hopefully we've got a bunch of photos in memory. It would be good to actually show them on screen. But first let's actually fix that little bug that I had. So if I resize this now, nope, okay. Flutter on macOS, reload. There we go. So now I can make this too big and it scrolls. So as I was saying before, there's a bunch of additional things that come with multiple platforms, and that's one of them. Suddenly people can resize you in all sorts of different ways, and you have to cope. Okay, so let's put a photo in. I'm going to use a stack. By now most of you hopefully understand that the majority of layout in Flutter consists of rows, columns, and occasionally a stack. Stack is really useful for putting one thing on top of another. There we go. We've got some photos. So this is good. We've got a photo, we've got a quote, but there's something missing here. There's a couple of things missing. One, to be in proper compliance with the Unsplash API, I'm supposed to credit the photographer. And secondly, if the photo is really light, the white text is going to disappear. So let's fix both of those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little text area at the bottom left that turns around and says who the photographer was. There we go. Photo by this person, and if we go over here, we've got that one. But on these light photos, it's kind of disappearing. What's a way of getting around that? Well, for anyone who's done any web development, the standard fix for any issue that you have with styling or anything is to add another div and to put something on that div. So I'm doing the moral equivalent of that by creating a container, which if I can find it, here we go. Here's the container, and I'm giving it a box decoration that gives it a color. So now we have basically a mask underneath the text, so the text has some contrast. And I should probably do the same thing for the attribution. Okay. Press save. That's got its little mask, that's got its little mask. Good. We're actually starting to get in a good place. So we have this quote, we've got a photo behind it, but what is really sticking in my core right now is that transition between one and the next. We've got this photo, and then we get this janky kick between the two. Wouldn't it be nice if we had the ability to, I don't know, animate stuff? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a duration where I basically take everything to black, make some changes, bring everything up again. So I'm going to fade in and out for a second, 200 milliseconds in the middle just to hold things dark for a little bit. For that, I need to add some state to my homepage state to say I'm doing this transition, i.e. whether it's visible or not. And of course, add appropriate kickers into my update cycle to actually toggle that value. But how do I take a value and actually turn it into an animation? Well, there's a couple of ways in Flutter. And the way I'm going to use, we call implicit animation. So once everything started respacing, I'll come back up here to the top and highlight this one. So we have a set of widgets that turn around and do animation things for you. So you can turn around and move things around, you can change various attributes about them. We have an animated container that you can turn around and resize, reshape, so on and so forth. But this one, I'm specifically interested in the opacity, so I'm using the animated opacity widget, and what I have to do, I have to give it what opacity, so I'm just toggling between 100% and 0%, and a duration for how long. Now if I press save, everything should come up from dark, and then after 15 seconds it will transition across. Okay. I look at this and I go, it's nice that we have this transition, but one of the things that kind of stands out to me is that it looks almost artificial. And this is actually something that animators, if you go back and look at Disney and various others, they figured out that linear animation looks wrong. It's something that just doesn't happen in nature. Everything starts off slow, gets going, and then slows down again at the end. So for that, we have the ability of a bunch of different curves. And I'm just going to use curve ease in out. It's basically a cubic curve, but we've got a whole raft of different curves. So now, when I press save again, we should get a nice looking ease in and out animation, and it will feel more sane. Depending how good my network is, whether you can see that the image is coming in halfway through the animation or not. It looks good at home. I have a good network at home. Over my phone, not so much. Okay, I mentioned before that there's just one last thing that is kind of sticking out to me, and if I can find it, here it is. So this photo client. When I turn around and take this web application, or when I take the web version of this Flutter application and I want to actually serve it from the web, I don't want it making hard-coded requests to this URL. I actually want to have the ability to specialize my build and have it make requests to a separate URL that it already knows about because it's being served off a web server. It kind of makes sense that that web server also serves the API. So how do I go about doing that? Dart gives us the ability to have imports dependent on what libraries are available and visible. So what this line is saying is import photo search client.dart, but if you actually have Dart library HTML, load this other one instead. And I'm going to turn around and use this wonderful thing called git and bring back two files. This one, yes, restore that file. And that one as well, thank you. Cool. So now if I look in my file system, you'll see that they've actually got the same content. But when I set this up for going to production, and I want to write this out as a JavaScript bundle that I serve off a web server, I can have it make requests to itself effectively, so that I can use it in testing, in staging, prod, all using effectively the same infrastructure. Okay. And with that, I think all of that is done. So now I can bring my laptop to its knees by stopping all the things. Start. Apparently Android's still running. It is too. No wonder my laptop was warm. Okay. So I'll slide that one over there. Go here. All the things. And hopefully, if my laptop doesn't melt down in the meantime, we'll see all four of them come up. So, any questions from the crowd? Up the back.
I think I can speak now.
Just won't capture for the recording, that's all.
Hi, so what are the parallels between the new release for the web versus the initiative that Google and a few other companies are doing on WebAssembly? In the future, do we see them colliding, or do we see a parallel infrastructure?
Right. So from the point of view of Flutter, WebAssembly is a great looking implementation technology, and we're in the process of figuring out where and how we can use it. We have various options about whether we generate our Dart code straight to WebAssembly or whether we just utilize it for various libraries under the hood. I don't know what the full outcome of it is. I know the engineers are working really hard to figure out what makes sense. And realistically, when it comes to the way our team approaches it, the guiding mission is 60 frames per second. So whatever technology that allows us to get 60 frames per second on all of our targets is the one we'll use. Okay? Cool.
I joined the session a bit late, but what are you using to change the code so fast?
I'll quite happily show you later. But basically I wrote a plugin for Visual Studio Code that does a whole bunch of diffs and splats them all up for me. It's on my GitHub repo github.com/domestic mouse something or other. It's up there, I promise.
I have a question. So the desktop thing looks great, and also the web thing, but how long is gonna, like, at least the beta stage that we can try it out? I probably don't want to try the master branch.
Yes. So there's a nice little call to action at the end of this that we're having an event in December, and I think we're doing a re-show down here on December the 12th, I believe.
On the 12th, yes.
You should probably come to that.
If your goal is to achieve 60 frames per second, do you worry about the battery life?
Okay, do we worry about battery life? Android, why do you hate me so? So one of the fun things about Flutter is, let's see if I can actually get Android to work. Bring up all the various bits. Okay, so one of the great things about Flutter is it was actually built by a bunch of engineers that came from Chrome. And one of the things that Chrome engineers worry about a lot is frames per second, but one of the things they worry about more is battery life. So they use a bunch of tricks from the gaming community of figuring out, okay, what is my display list? Has it changed from last time? So the majority of the Flutter stack is actually an optimization technique where you feed it a list of, here's the things I want on the screen, and it goes, have I seen this list before? If yes, I don't need to actually wake up the GPU. So if your screen stays stable, and there's various things you can turn around and, damn you Android, there's various things you can do to turn on debugging stuff where you can see effectively a bar across the top that shows you the amount of time per frame, and when the frame stops, it stops moving because we've stopped actually kicking the GPU. So yes, we worry about battery life, which is why we suggest things like don't have always running animations, or at least if you do, confine them to a small part of the tree, because then we only have to throw away a small part of what's in the GPU, so we have to do less work. So there's a bunch of things that we do, but there's also some things you need to do to get good battery performance.
Could you tell me anything about the cross-platform, something like a service worker? How is it supposed to be supported? Sorry if it's slightly related. Or like background execution,
yes,
separate from the main UI thread.
So there's a couple of different, okay, so talking about background execution, there's a couple of different things you could possibly mean, and there's different answers for different parts of that. There's the potential for running multiple threads at runtime. So turn around and go, I want to load this image on a different thread. Flutter does that automatically for you. Or in the case of Flutter for web, we use the browser to do that for you. Then there's the thing about, I want something running in the background always, that I can turn around and update caches and do that sort of thing. Now each different platform, ooh, looks like my phone's not happy. Stop that one. If you look at, say, iOS basically has very limited things that you can do in the background. You have to basically be an audio player, or there's a couple of other exceptions. Android, I think you got pretty much free reign at the moment, but don't quote me. There are actual Android people here today. Go ask them. On the web, I'm not quite sure what the story is with regards to that. We have a plugin story for the web. I'm just not fully up to speed on what it is. So there are ways of doing it. I just don't know them all at this point. So yeah, plugins. And each platform's plugin story is slightly different.
All right, thank you so much, Brett.
Thank you all.